On a blazing afternoon in the high desert of Arizona, where the temperature climbed past 100 degrees and the sky stretched endlessly blue, a woman vanished from her own home. It was June 2004, in a quiet subdivision where children rode bicycles in circles and neighbors knew each other's names. The woman was 32 years old. Her name was Jennifer Morgan. She was a schoolteacher, a mother of 2 young daughters, and by all accounts she had been planning a summer vacation to California with her family. But on June 18, 2004, Jennifer Morgan disappeared without her purse, without her car keys, without her cell phone, and without a single witness to explain where she had gone. Her husband reported her missing that same evening. The investigation that followed would stretch across 2 decades, fracture a family, and ultimately reveal a truth so carefully hidden that even those closest to the case had stopped believing it would ever surface. How does someone vanish from their own kitchen in broad daylight, and why would it take 20 years to find out what happened? The town was called Desert Vista, a planned community 30 miles north of Phoenix, built in the late 1990s when developers saw profit in the sprawling Sonoran landscape. The houses were stucco and terracotta, arranged in curved streets with names like Sunset Ridge and Canyon View, though there were no ridges and the nearest canyon was 15 miles away. The subdivision attracted young families, people who worked in Phoenix but wanted space, a yard, a garage for 2 cars. The homes had central air conditioning that ran constantly from May through September, and the lawns required daily watering to stay green against the relentless sun. By 2004, Desert Vista had approximately 4,000 residents. It was the kind of place where people moved to start over, to build something stable. Jennifer Morgan had lived there for 3 years. She taught 4th grade at Desert Vista Elementary, a low-slung building with solar panels and a playground ringed by chain-link fence. Her students knew her as patient and creative, someone who brought in rocks and fossils for science lessons, who read aloud with different voices for each character. She had dark hair that she wore pulled back in a ponytail, a quick smile, and a habit of humming while she graded papers. Those who knew her said she was organized, the type of person who meal planned on Sundays and kept a color-coded calendar on the refrigerator. Her husband, David Morgan, was 35, a software consultant who worked from home 3 days a week and traveled to client sites the other 2. He was tall and quiet, with wire-rimmed glasses and a tendency to speak in technical terms even about ordinary things. They had 2 daughters, Emily, age 7, and Sophie, age 4. The family attended a non-denominational church on Sundays. They had a golden retriever named Biscuit. From the outside, it looked like a life that worked. June 18, 2004 was a Friday. School had been out for a week. The temperature that morning was already 85 degrees by 9 o'clock, climbing steadily. Jennifer had the day off, no summer school duties yet. David was home, working in the converted bedroom they used as an office, participating in conference calls with a client in California. Emily and Sophie were in the living room, watching a movie, something animated with talking animals. The house was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning and the faint dialogue from the television. Jennifer had been making lunch, a simple thing, sandwiches and fruit. She had taken chicken salad from the refrigerator, white bread from the pantry, a knife from the drawer. At approximately 12:15 in the afternoon, David emerged from the office for a break. He said later that he had been on the phone for nearly 2 hours and needed to stretch his legs. He walked into the kitchen and found the ingredients still on the counter. The chicken salad container was open. The bread bag was unsealed. The knife lay beside the cutting board, but Jennifer was not there. He called her name. No answer. He checked the bathroom, the bedroom, the garage. Her car was still there, a silver Honda Accord parked in its usual spot. Her purse was on the entry table. Her cell phone was charging on the kitchen counter. He walked outside, looked up and down the street. The neighborhood was silent, heat shimmering off the asphalt. He came back inside and asked the girls if they had seen their mother. Emily said she had not. Sophie said she thought Mommy had gone outside. David checked again, walking the perimeter of the house, calling her name. Nothing. By 12:45, he called her cell phone from the landline, heard it ringing from the kitchen counter. He called her parents, who lived in Tucson, 2 hours south. They had not heard from her. He called 2 of her friends from church. Neither had spoken to her that day. At 1:30 in the afternoon, David Morgan called the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office and reported his wife missing. The deputy who took the call noted that the husband sounded calm, almost clinical in his description of events. The deputy asked if there had been an argument. David said no. The deputy asked if Jennifer had seemed upset or depressed. David said no, she had been normal, planning the trip to California, talking about what to pack. The deputy said someone would come out to take a report. 2 deputies arrived at the Morgan residence at 2:45 in the afternoon. They spoke with David in the living room while the girls watched television in another room. The deputies took notes. They asked about Jennifer's habits, her routines, whether she had ever disappeared before. David said she had not. They asked about their marriage. David said it was fine, no major problems. They asked if Jennifer had access to money, if she might have left voluntarily. David said her wallet was in her purse, her credit cards untouched. The deputies walked through the house, noting the unfinished lunch preparation, the phone still charging, the car in the garage. One deputy later wrote in his report, "No sign of struggle, no indication of forced entry. Husband cooperative but oddly composed for someone whose wife vanished an hour ago." By evening, a search operation was forming. Neighbors gathered in the street, organizing into groups. The sheriff's department brought in a helicopter with thermal imaging to sweep the desert surrounding the subdivision. Volunteers walked the empty lots between houses, calling Jennifer's name. The temperature had dropped to 93 degrees, but the heat still pressed down like a weight. Jennifer's parents arrived from Tucson, frantic and tearful. Her mother asked David what had happened, and he repeated the same account. She had been making lunch, he had been working, she was simply gone. Her father walked the neighborhood for hours, knocking on doors, asking if anyone had seen anything. No one had. The subdivision had been quiet that afternoon, most people inside, away from the heat. One neighbor mentioned seeing a white van earlier in the day, unfamiliar, driving slowly. Another said they thought they heard a car door close around noon, but they had not looked out the window. These details were noted, filed away, but they led nowhere. The first night passed without answers. Searchers returned the next morning, expanding the perimeter. Bloodhounds were brought in, given Jennifer's scent from a pillowcase. The dogs tracked to the end of the driveway and then stopped, circling in confusion. If Jennifer had walked away, the dogs could not determine which direction she had gone. The local news covered the story that evening: teacher missing from Desert Vista home. David appeared on camera, standing on his front lawn, asking anyone with information to come forward. He read from a prepared statement, his voice steady, his hands still. Those who watched later said there was something in his manner that felt rehearsed, but grief affects people differently, and no one wanted to judge a man whose wife had vanished. By the end of the first week, the search had slowed. Hundreds of hours had been logged, thousands of acres searched. There was no body, no evidence of an abduction, no ransom demand, no sighting. Jennifer Morgan had simply ceased to exist in the physical world. The case remained open, but active leads dried up. Investigators began to look more closely at the husband. Part 2. The investigation. The search operation in those first days was extensive, methodical, and ultimately fruitless. Teams from the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office coordinated with volunteers from the community, dividing the area into grids. They searched the desert scrubland to the north, the undeveloped parcels between subdivisions, the dry washes and gullies where monsoon rains occasionally carved temporary rivers. Helicopters circled overhead, cameras sweeping the landscape. Divers checked a retention pond 2 miles away, though there was no logical reason Jennifer would have gone there. Door-to-door canvassing yielded nothing. No one had seen her leave the house. No one had heard a scream or a commotion. The neighborhood had been quiet, ordinary, unremarkable. The media coverage intensified. Jennifer's photograph appeared on the evening news, a smiling portrait from a school function. Her parents made tearful appeals. Her colleagues from Desert Vista Elementary held a vigil, lighting candles and praying for her safe return. Posters went up across Phoenix. Missing. Jennifer Morgan, 32, last seen June 18, 2004. The story gained traction on local radio, then on regional news networks. Tips came in, dozens at first, then hundreds. A woman matching Jennifer's description was seen at a gas station in Flagstaff. Another sighting placed her in Las Vegas. A psychic called to say she had visions of water and darkness. Each lead was followed, documented, and dismissed. None of them brought Jennifer home. Investigators began to notice inconsistencies. Small things at first, details that did not quite align. David Morgan said he had been on a conference call from approximately 10:15 until 12:15, which was why he had not noticed Jennifer's absence. Detectives requested phone records. The records showed that the conference call had ended at 11:52, 23 minutes before David said he left the office. When asked about this, David said he must have been mistaken about the time, that he had stayed in the office finishing up notes after the call ended. The explanation was plausible, but the discrepancy was noted. Another inconsistency. David said Jennifer had been planning a trip to California, that she had been excited about it, discussing details. But when investigators spoke with Jennifer's mother, she said Jennifer had mentioned concerns about the trip, that she seemed anxious, though she had not explained why. When confronted, David said his wife had not shared those concerns with him. Detectives also observed David's demeanor during interviews. He was calm, almost detached, answering questions with precision but little emotion. When asked how he felt about his wife's disappearance, he said, "I want her to come home safely." When pressed about their relationship, he said, "We had a normal marriage. We didn't fight." But neighbors told a different story. One couple mentioned hearing raised voices from the Morgan house a week before Jennifer disappeared, though they could not make out the words. Another neighbor said Jennifer had seemed withdrawn in the days leading up to her disappearance, less likely to chat over the fence or wave hello. These observations were subjective, circumstantial, but they painted a picture that complicated David's narrative. Physical evidence was sparse. The house showed no signs of a struggle. There were no bloodstains, no broken glass, no overturned furniture. The unfinished lunch in the kitchen suggested Jennifer had been interrupted, but by what or whom remained unknown. Forensic teams processed the home, collecting fingerprints, hair samples, fibers. They found nothing unusual, nothing that suggested violence. The garage was examined. Jennifer's car was dusty. The odometer reading indicated she had not driven it recently. David's car, a dark blue sedan, was also examined. It was clean, recently washed. David said he had washed it the day before Jennifer disappeared, a routine chore. The trunk was vacuumed, spotless. Detectives took samples anyway, but the lab results came back unremarkable. As weeks turned into months, the investigation shifted. Detectives began to build a profile of David Morgan. They learned he had significant credit card debt, nearly $40,000 accumulated over the past 2 years. He had not disclosed this to Jennifer's family. They learned he had been communicating with a woman he had met online, someone who lived in Oregon. The messages were flirtatious but not overtly incriminating. When asked about this, David admitted to the correspondence but said it was meaningless, a distraction from work stress. The woman in Oregon confirmed the conversations but said she had never met David in person and had no knowledge of his wife's disappearance. Detectives considered the possibility that David had wanted out of the marriage, that financial pressure or infidelity had created a motive. But without a body, without direct evidence, they could not build a case. Deputies whispered quietly among themselves about the husband's behavior. One detective wrote in his notes, "Subject shows no emotional response when discussing wife. Answers are rehearsed, lacking spontaneity. Maintains eye contact, but affect is flat." Another noted, "Timeline inconsistencies suggest subject had opportunity. Lack of physical evidence suggests planning." But suspicion is not proof, and the case file grew thick with theories and dead ends. By the end of 2004, the investigation had stalled. Jennifer Morgan's case was reclassified as a cold case, kept open but no longer actively pursued. Her family continued to search, to hope, to grieve. David Morgan remained in the house with his daughters, living under a cloud of suspicion but never charged. Part 3. The Silence. 2 years passed, then 5, then 10. The Morgan house in Desert Vista remained occupied, though the neighborhood around it changed. New families moved in unaware of the history. The story of Jennifer Morgan faded from the news, remembered only by those who had known her. Her parents aged, their hope dimming but never fully extinguished. They visited the girls when David allowed it, though the visits became less frequent over time. Emily and Sophie grew older, their memories of their mother becoming fragmented, pieces of a past they could not fully reconstruct. David Morgan continued to work to raise his daughters to maintain the appearance of normalcy. Those who knew him said he rarely spoke of Jennifer. When asked, he would say she was gone, that he hoped someday there would be answers. He did not remarry. He did not date, at least not publicly. He attended parent-teacher conferences, coached Sophie's soccer team for a season, helped Emily with college applications. From the outside, he was a devoted father managing a tragic situation. But beneath the surface, those who paid attention noticed cracks. Emily, as she grew into her teenage years, became withdrawn. She stopped attending church. She stopped bringing friends home. Her grades, once excellent, began to slip. Teachers described her as distracted, distant. In therapy sessions her grandparents arranged, she spoke in vague terms about feeling unsafe, though she could not or would not articulate why. Her therapist noted, "Client exhibits signs of unresolved trauma, reluctant to discuss home life. Mentions nightmares but refuses to describe content." Sophie, younger and perhaps more adaptable, seemed to fare better, but she too had moments of strange behavior. She drew pictures in art class that troubled her teachers. Dark houses, empty rooms, a woman's face with no features. When asked about the drawings, Sophie would shrug and say she did not know why she drew them. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt the gnawing suspicion that something is not right but have no proof, the experience is a kind of torment. Emily lived with that feeling for years. She could not articulate it, could not point to a specific moment or incident that explained her unease. But she felt it in the silence of the house, in the way her father avoided certain topics, in the strange absence of photographs of her mother in the common areas. The pictures existed, but they were stored in boxes in the garage, as if her mother's image was too painful to display, or too incriminating. In 2014, 10 years after Jennifer's disappearance, David and his daughters moved out of the Desert Vista house. He said the memories were too difficult, that they needed a fresh start. They relocated to Scottsdale, to a smaller home in a different school district. Emily was 17, a senior in high school. Sophie was 14. The move was presented as a chance to heal, but it felt like an erasure. Jennifer's parents were not consulted. They learned of the move only after it had happened. When they asked why, David said it was time to let go, to move forward. But letting go felt like betrayal, like closing a door that should remain open. The marriage, such as it had been, had dissolved in the years after Jennifer vanished. David had never officially divorced her because she was not legally declared deceased until 2011, 7 years after her disappearance. The decree came at David's request, a necessary step for financial and legal purposes. Jennifer's parents opposed it, but the law was clear. After 7 years without contact, a person could be presumed deceased. The court issued the order. David collected on a life insurance policy, a modest sum, $50,000. He said he put it into college funds for the girls. Jennifer's parents wondered if he had hidden other assets, other motives, but they had no way to prove it. Emily's relationship with her father deteriorated as she aged. She began to see inconsistencies in his stories, the way he described the day her mother disappeared. The timeline never quite made sense. She remembered being 4 years old, watching cartoons, and then suddenly her mother was gone and people were searching. She remembered her father on the phone, his voice calm, explaining to someone that his wife had vanished. Even as a child, she had thought it strange that he did not seem upset. As she grew older, that strangeness solidified into suspicion. She began to research her mother's case online, reading old news articles, forum posts, amateur theories. Some people believed Jennifer had run away, started a new life. Others believed she had been taken. But a persistent thread, a common theory, was that the husband knew more than he had said. In the spring of 2019, 15 years after her mother's disappearance, Emily moved out. She was 22, working as a receptionist and taking classes at community college. She found an apartment with a roommate, put distance between herself and her father. Sophie, now 19, stayed home, still financially dependent. The two sisters rarely spoke about their mother, the topic too heavy, too unresolved. But Emily could not let it go. She began reaching out to the detectives who had originally worked the case, most of whom had retired. She contacted Jennifer's old friends, her coworkers, anyone who might remember something, anything that had been overlooked. She was looking for a crack in the facade, a thread to pull. That thread came in the form of Sophie. In the fall of 2023, 19 years after Jennifer's disappearance, Sophie called Emily. It was late at night, past 11. Sophie was crying, her voice breaking. She said she needed to talk, that she could not carry it anymore. Emily drove to a coffee shop near Sophie's apartment, and there, in a corner booth, Sophie told her sister what she remembered. She had been 4 years old, but the memory had come back in pieces over the years, fragments that she had dismissed as dreams or imagination. But therapy, which she had started secretly 6 months earlier, had unlocked something. She remembered the day their mother disappeared. She remembered being in the living room, the television on. She remembered hearing voices from the kitchen, angry voices, her father's voice. She remembered hearing something fall, something heavy. She remembered her father coming into the living room, telling her and Emily to stay put, not to move. She remembered him going outside to the garage. She remembered silence. And she remembered later her father returning, his shirt changed, his hands washed, his face composed. She did not remember seeing her mother after that. Emily listened, her hands shaking. She asked Sophie if she was sure if the memory was real or constructed. Sophie said she did not know, but she knew it felt real, and she knew she could not stay silent anymore. The weight of it was crushing her. Emily said they needed to go to the police. Sophie was afraid of what it would mean, afraid of their father, afraid of being wrong. But Emily convinced her. Justice, if it existed, required truth. And truth, no matter how painful, was better than the silence. Part 4. The Revelation. On November 3, 2023, Emily and Sophie Morgan walked into the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office and requested to speak with someone about their mother's case. They were directed to Detective Laura Hernandez, a veteran investigator who had reviewed the cold case file 6 months earlier as part of a department initiative to revisit unsolved disappearances using new forensic techniques. Detective Hernandez listened as Sophie, hands trembling, recounted her recovered memory. She described the voices, the sound of something falling, her father's strange behavior. Emily corroborated parts of the account, explaining that she had been 7 at the time and remembered her father seeming unusually calm, that the timeline he had given never made sense. Detective Hernandez took detailed notes. She asked Sophie to repeat certain details, to be as specific as possible. She asked if Sophie would be willing to undergo a cognitive interview, a technique designed to help witnesses recall suppressed memories. Sophie agreed. Over the next 2 weeks, Sophie participated in 3 sessions with a forensic psychologist. The sessions were recorded. In the second session, Sophie recalled additional details. She remembered her father carrying something wrapped in a tarp from the garage to his car. She remembered the trunk being open. She remembered him driving away and returning an hour later. These details, fragmented and uncertain, were enough to reopen the investigation. Detective Hernandez requested the original case file, all evidence, all witness statements. She also requested a warrant to search the property where the Morgan family had lived in 2004, though it had changed hands twice since then. The warrant was granted. On December 1, 2023, a forensic team descended on the Desert Vista house. The current owners, a retired couple, were cooperative but bewildered. The team used ground-penetrating radar to scan the backyard, the garage foundation, the areas around the property. They found anomalies in the soil near the back fence, places where the ground had been disturbed and filled in. Excavation began. 6 feet down, wrapped in deteriorated plastic sheeting and a tarp, they found human remains. The skeleton was largely intact. Dental records confirmed the identity: Jennifer Morgan. She had been there the entire time, buried 20 feet from where her daughters had played, where her husband had mowed the lawn, where searchers had walked in 2004. The autopsy revealed blunt force trauma to the skull, 3 distinct fractures consistent with being struck by a heavy object. The forensic pathologist estimated the injuries would have been fatal, causing immediate or near-immediate loss of consciousness followed by death. The remains also showed evidence of perimortem rib fractures, suggesting a violent struggle or assault. There was no fabric remaining to analyze, but the plastic sheeting and tarp fragments were sent to the lab. They matched materials commonly available at hardware stores in 2004. The cause of death was ruled as blunt force trauma. The manner of death was ruled as homicide. On December 8, 2023, David Morgan was arrested at his home in Scottsdale. He was 54 years old, graying and thinner than he had been in 2004, but still composed. Detective Hernandez and 2 other officers knocked on his door at 6 in the morning. When David answered, she identified herself and informed him he was under arrest for the murder of Jennifer Morgan. She said he had the right to remain silent, that anything he said could be used against him. David said nothing. He did not ask why. He did not protest his innocence. He simply nodded and extended his hands for the handcuffs. As he was led to the patrol car, a neighbor recorded the scene on a cell phone. The video, later aired on local news, showed a man who appeared resigned, as if he had been waiting 19 years for this moment. The arrest made national news. Arizona cold case solved after nearly 20 years ran the headline in the Arizona Republic. The story detailed the original investigation, the recovery of remains, and the daughter's testimony. Public reaction was swift and divided. Those who had always suspected David felt vindicated. "I knew something was wrong with him," one former neighbor told reporters. "He never cried. He never seemed upset. It was like she didn't matter." Others, including a few colleagues from his work, expressed disbelief. "David was quiet, yes, but he was a good father. I can't believe he would do something like this." The debate played out on social media, in comment sections, in living rooms across the state, but the evidence once hidden now spoke clearly. The trial began in June 2024. The prosecution presented the forensic evidence, the remains, the cause of death, the location of burial. They presented Sophie's testimony, her memories of that day, fragmented but consistent with the physical evidence. They presented the timeline inconsistencies from 2004, the financial motive, the online communications with another woman. They argued that David Morgan had killed his wife in a moment of rage or premeditation, that he had buried her body in the backyard, and that he had spent nearly 2 decades maintaining the lie. The defense argued that Sophie's memories were unreliable, the product of suggestion and trauma, that the forensic evidence could not definitively place David at the scene of burial, that the case was circumstantial. They argued that someone else could have entered the home, that Jennifer could have been taken and later returned to the property without David's knowledge. The jury did not find these arguments persuasive. On July 15, 2024, after 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. David Morgan showed no reaction. He sat motionless as the verdict was read, his hands folded on the table in front of him. The judge set sentencing for 2 months later. On September 10, 2024, David Morgan was sentenced to 25 years to life in the Arizona State Prison. He declined to make a statement. He did not apologize. He did not confess. He was led away in handcuffs, and the courtroom emptied slowly, people filing out into the bright Phoenix sunlight, blinking against the glare. Jennifer's parents attended every day of the trial. They sat in the front row holding hands, their faces etched with grief and relief. After the sentencing, Jennifer's mother spoke to reporters. She said, "We waited 19 years for this. 19 years of not knowing, of hopping, of doubting ourselves. Jennifer deserved better. Our granddaughters deserved better. But now we know the truth, and that has to be enough." Emily and Sophie did not speak publicly. They released a joint statement through their attorney. "We loved our mother. We loved our father. This has broken us in ways we cannot describe. But the truth matters. Justice matters. We hope our mother can rest now." Closing. The case of Jennifer Morgan is a reminder that time does not erase the truth. It can bury it, obscure it, allow it to decay into fragments and whispers, but the truth has a weight that eventually breaks through. For 19 years, a woman lay beneath the soil of her own backyard, and for 19 years, her family lived with unanswered questions and unbearable silence. The resolution brought no joy, only a grim accounting of what had been hidden. But it brought something else too, the acknowledgement that Jennifer Morgan had existed, that she had mattered, that her absence was not an accident or a choice but a consequence of violence. In the end, she was found. In the end, her daughters chose truth over complicity. That is the only justice possible in a case like this. If this story mattered to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Share the episode. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard.